We moved here in 1992.
My goodness.
Longest I've ever lived anywhere, but we were caretakers at the observatory. I mean, I literally made up the beds clean for the real astronomers.
Well, I'm Dr. Jack F.G., and I'm interviewing today Dr. Virginia Latham, who is more than a physician to me, but a very, very dear and deep friend, who I've had the honor of knowing now for several decades, through thick and thin. And we're here to chat with you about your life, and maybe a little bit about our life, and what you meant to medicine, what you meant to David and your family, how you got to be where you are, and what you've meant to medicine. Because if I can just start briefly, I think you are the first woman I have known who has been fully accepted by all who serve in medicine, irrespective of whether you're a man or a woman. We have come to see you as one of us, and we've come to know that we are one of you. So thank you for being here today.
That's awfully sweet. I'm sure there are lots of other people who are equally deserving of your compliments, or more so. But that's very sweet of you. And I got to know Jack through the Mass Medical Society, but although you didn't directly ask me, I suppose you might be interested in how I got into the whole idea of being a doctor in the first place.
Yes.
And the answer to that for me was that I lived very near the Newton Free Library for Children, which was a specific Victorian little building that you could go to and read. And I started reading about Jane Addams, just a random book I picked up, who was a woman doctor. My father was a doctor, and I knew distantly of a woman who was a pediatrician. Other than that, I'd never heard of a woman doctor, never thought about a woman doctor, but I was fascinated by this woman, Jane Addams, in the 1800s, who had become a woman doctor. And I was fascinated by what my father did. As the oldest child in the family, he frequently let me ride along when he made house calls or when he was going into the hospital to round on a Saturday morning or something. And I thought that was all intriguing. Now, but of course, you know, since you grew up in the same era, it was not at all commonplace for women to be doctors. And I always thought of it as something you did if you couldn't get a proper husband. And that was sort of how it was put to me when I was a child, that if the main reason you wanted to be an educated woman and you should go to schools and do the best you could was so that you found a proper husband who would support you well and take care of you and be an interesting person to live with. But the idea that you would go and have a career was a fallback, because the alternative was being an old maid. You haven't heard anybody say old maid in decades, but that was, you may not have, but that was a very common way to look at it in those days.
I can't imagine you as an old maid.
Well, this other part of me said I really didn't want to be an old maid, which is how I got sidetracked from being a doctor, and I made the decision when my husband approached me about getting married. I thought, well, I was at Duke as an undergraduate, and I walked back and forth around the medical school, trying to decide if that was what I wanted to do, or I wanted to have my vine-covered cottage with the bouncy kids around and so forth. And I decided that Dave and the potential bouncy kids were more important to me at the age of 20, and so I got married. And I had all these little boys, and the life was fun, and I was thoroughly enjoying it. But we moved to Tucson when my husband graduated from his PhD in astronomy. And while we were there, the person who rented the house to us and was somewhat disturbed when she came to collect the rent saw 5 little boys running all over her house and insisted that I hire somebody who would come over the border illegally to be a a babysitter for the kids, I found I could go to the market, and I could go to the library, and I could do things without having to put on 5 sets of snowsuits and mittens and gloves and what have you to do everything. And I started thinking about medical school again. So I came back and I took the MCATs, and I went to, and I applied to medical schools, and they basically laughed in my face. I particularly well remember going out, the first interview offer I got. I was waiting in the waiting area with other people that were there for interviews, and he said, Virginia Latham. So I got up and went in, and he said, now, before we go any further, I want to make it clear to you that I really don't think there's any chance we would ever consider somebody with 5 children, but the group thought that you were so unique, we ought to meet you, even though we don't think you should come to medical school with 5 children. That wouldn't make any sense. My first instinct was to burst into tears. My second instinct was I'd be darned if I'd let him see me have that reaction. So then he wanted to show me how great the medical school was going to be and walk around, show me all the aspects of the medical school. And I did it for a little while, and I finally said, I'm sorry, I have a babysitter and I have to leave now. Because I was so angry that I had, gone and got my hair cut, bought a new suit. We didn't have 2 extra cents to rub together, and trucked off to this interview that was a joke. But anyway, after so I took a year, and Dave suggested I go back to school and in a program that Harvard runs for Harvard graduates who decide to change careers. So if you majored in sociology and you want to be a lawyer, or you majored in chemistry and you want to be a social worker or something, they can steer you into a new career track. Now, I hadn't gone to Harvard, but Dave taught there, so they took me in under a broad umbrella, and I took a bunch of courses that were, I was 12 years out of college, mind you, when I took this, but I took a bunch of courses to prove to them that my brain still cranked over a little bit. The next time around, I got in everywhere, it was quite an experience. But I thought I'd met it all until I got to medical school. We had 40% women in our class. Ran into no prejudice at all about being a woman, and they were very welcoming to all of us. And there were a lot of other odd people in my class who had done other things since they'd gone to college. Had a great time, and then went looking for intern and residency positions, and that went very smoothly. And then it was time to look for a job.
Well, before you look for a job, how did you feel when you wanted to do this?
Right.
And suddenly you were there on your way.
Yeah.
What was going on in your head about that?
I was just so excited. I was thrilled to be there. And at the time, Harvard Med required that everybody who came in as a student had a physical exam with their doctors and mental health exam with their psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist said, now, how do you feel about medical school? I know it's a lot of work and all this stuff. And I said, you cannot imagine how neat it is to be here. This is something I've always dreamed of doing. My husband is very supportive. I'm getting to do the 2 things in life I ever wanted to do. This is absolutely wonderful. And he said, do you have manic episodes very often?
You said yes, right?
And I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, well, how often are you depressed? I said, I'm not depressed, I'm just happy to be here.
So David was very nurturing.
David was very nurturing. I grew up in a household where, to quote my father at the time, ladies do not do things like this. They do not desert their husband and children in order to run off after a career.
Yeah.
I did not raise you to be this kind of woman. Although later, after I actually got in medical school over his protest, he wrote me an extremely gracious letter and said, I was wrong. I'm delighted you're doing it.
You did.
you're right to hang in there and so forth.
Yeah.
But he thought it was a horrible idea to start with.
And that must have been tough for you, at least initially.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. But he more than made up for it with that letter.
Yeah. He was a very nurturing man in many ways.
He was basically a very nurturing man and very proud of his children and so forth.
So then you became a doctor, actually.
Yeah, so then I became a doctor.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. And it was funny, my kids, my oldest son said when I first got into medical school, this is so embarrassing. Nobody in my class has a mother who's going to school. He was like 14. Well, it's so embarrassing. I tell people of mothers in school, and then people like the secretary at the school was paying, I can't believe your mother's doing this. This is so great. And so, but then it was okay. Sort of like my father when his friends started saying, you have a daughter in medical school, that's fabulous.
Do you think that experience has helped you help other young women?
I don't know whether it has, but one of the joys to me of being the MMS president was how many of my patients who I had since they were teenage girls as patients, became doctors. I'd be sitting there at the desk at the Medical Society. When you are president, you sign all the things that, I can't remember exactly what they said, but that you welcome so-and-so as a new member of the Mass Medical Society and so forth. And at least 6 or 7 of those came across my desk in that 1 year were girls who had been patients of mine,
yeah.
Or in one case who I'd known through another capacity at the in the town.
Because you've had a tremendous impact on women, in fact, a lot of young people.
Well, thank you. I think we all have, but it is a source of great pride and joy to me that other people saw it as possible.
I'll bet at this point you can't visit another country or another city, but what you run into somebody who you've met through medicine.
Oh yes, yeah. There are so many contacts. Of course, I have this other whole series of contacts too, with astronomers and their wives all over the world.
What's it been like to chase after David through the universe?
Great. It's offered me an opportunity to go places I never would have gone, and to meet people I would never have otherwise met, and who are just as interesting as patients are.
So now you're a doctor, Jane,
Mm-hmm.
and you've decided to go on.
Right.
How did you figure out that internal medicine was where you wanted to go?
I talked my way into medical school partially by pointing out that having raised 5 sons, I knew so much about kids and adolescents, and that was my home life, and therefore I was going to make a wonderful pediatrician or adolescent medicine doctor. And when I got through with my rotation, I couldn't decide which one I was going to do, and I kept taking rotations in one after the other, trying to decide which am I going to do. And one of my last rotations was at Children's, and I walked into a room one day where there were 2 children, one of whom badly scalded by parents who poured boiling water on him, making him stop crying, and the other was a child who had an enormous head, who had hydrocephalus, and the mother was rocking and singing to this poor child with hydrocephalus that she was going to lose, and this other family had poured boiling water on this cute little boy. And I thought, I can't deal with this. I really cannot deal with this. And I had found that in dealing with adults, part of the joy of it, medicine to me, was that they would tell me their troubles, that I could talk to them rationally about what was going to happen to them and how we could make it work as best as possible for them if they were dying, or if they were going to live, how they could live their lives by making changes and so forth, and that was my calling, not the children.
Very interesting.
To which my children said, one of my sons said, "Oh, Mom, thank God you're not going to be a pediatrician." He said, "Do you realize when you did rotations at the Children's Hospital, how mean you were to us. I said, oh, and he said,
Mean?
well, his definition of mean was I would come home and say, I can't believe you two are fighting about that. You should be on your hands and knees thanking God that you have 2 arms and 2 legs. Or, you know, my perspective that their life was easy compared to that of all these terribly sick children I was seeing and so forth. So I had very
you
little
think that
patience for
medicine
the
helped you raise your children? Was there anything else that made you decide that internal medicine was the field for you, rather than, say, surgery or anything else?
Well, surgery was an obvious answer. When I went to my medical school interviews, I very carefully folded my hands and refused all offers of coffee or tea because I thought if they could see how much my hands shake, they would be the end of my medical career.
Right, yeah.
And at the time, I could still do very fine embroidery and did all the time and knitting and stuff because I could overcome it.
Yeah.
But to anyone else, it looks like you're either scared to death or an alcoholic or you've got end-stage Parkinson's disease or some other reason why you shake. All I have to do is bring all my relatives.
They're all the same.
Anyway, sorry if that was a
Well,
diversion.
that's an interesting, but I think things like that have a bigger impact on our life than we realize.
Right. But the internal medicine, I liked thinking through, and still do, thinking through how could this be happening as opposed to looking at it as, well, everybody says that if you have X, you should take this dose of drug Y. I like looking at things at a more of a biochemical level and thinking about, well, what could be causing this, and could it be related to that other thing, and sort of thinking on an individual, trying to think more on an individual basis of what makes sense for this person and what kind of underlying disease could they have that's causing them to feel this way. And that kind of puzzles were a large part of what internal medicine involved you in.
My goodness. Do you think some of that inquisitiveness came from your life with your dad?
Well, perhaps. I think I was
And what perhaps was
sort of inquisitive. One of those children who walk around and say, why?
Why?
Drive everybody crazy.
Wait, I know what that's all about.